Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show dog trainer, firefighter paramedic, Canine Search Specialist, and co-founder of the S.I.R.E.N Project, Tim Houweling. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the world of search dogs, the personality makeup of a good search canine, his journey into the fire service, some notable special operations deployments, his own powerful mental health story, the healing power of psychedelics, the genesis of the S.I.R.E.N Project, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of now over 1,200 episodes. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Tim Houweling. Enjoy. Well, Tim, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to your wife, Angela, for making this connection in the first place. And secondly, I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. This is about my first time actually being out in public to talk about some of these things. So I appreciate the platform.
Yeah, no, well, it needs to be spoken about. I mean, many of the areas that we're going to discuss today. Very first question, where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
Right now I'm in Carmel Valley, which is in Monterey County, California. And it's a beautiful 80-degree day here in February. And this is an amazing part of the country. We're outside of the fancy Carmel. We can't afford to live in Brad Pitt country, but we're about 25 minutes away up in the valley. And it's a fantastic little community with beautiful weather. And I can't imagine living anywhere else right now.
Brad Pitt country. He was born there or he lives there now?
He moved here a couple of years ago into Carmel Highlands. And so you can follow the drones for those looking for Brad Pitt spotting over on the coast.
I was talking to someone literally yesterday about fame. Like, I can't think of anything worse than your child playing football somewhere, soccer, and having photographers hiding in the bushes. I think I'd be in prison by now. So I think anonymity is a superpower. I don't think people realize that.
Absolutely. I can't imagine doing the thing that you love and becoming famous for it and then being sort of, stuck in the prison of fame afterwards and not being able to do all the little things that make life nice.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's start at the very beginning of your timeline then. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
So I was born and raised in Redwood City, California, which is on the peninsula, now kind of Silicon Valley, people know it as. I was the baby of 4. I have 3 older sisters. They're 9, 8, and 6 years older than me. So in a lot of ways, I kind of grew up as an only child. They were a little bit older, and being girls, they didn't really like to go play Star Wars figures in the backyard. And my parents remained married. They went through their own sort of tough times. My dad was a recovering alcoholic who found sobriety when I was about 4 or 5, and grew up really playing a lot of sports and focused on baseball a lot. So Redwood City was a great place to grow up. It's a little suburb now of the bigger cities. We're about a half hour south of San Francisco. And then I went to Sarah High School in San Mateo, which is an all-boys Catholic school, and had a great experience there. Played basketball, played baseball for 4 years, and best known for the schools of Tom Brady and Lynn Swann and Barry Bonds. So kind of a big sports high school, as it turns out, but terrific education. And from there, I went on to Santa Clara University, which is in the heart of Silicon Valley here. It's a Jesuit college, and ended up doing accounting because it was really the only subject I was good at. For some reason, it's the first class in all my classes, leading up to it that I got an A in. So I thought accounting was the way to go. My dad was a businessman. He sold insurance for construction companies. My mom was a nurse, a labor delivery nurse, but I was always sort of steered in the direction of go be, a business guy. We don't have to get our hands dirty anymore. Let's go live in the white collar world. It's a lot easier on your body and go use your brain to do something. So accounting just kind of made sense. And when I graduated from Santa Clara in 1994, those were the places where there were jobs. So there was a little bit of recession going on and I could actually get hired. So I actually came out of college and I was a CPA for about 6 years. And so that was a whole nother world. I can't imagine doing that now and going into an office, but it was a great start, and it's things I still use today in terms of how to understand finances, accounting, things like that.
Going back to your father's struggles, knowing now, especially in what we're going to discuss later, how much childhood trauma factors into a lot of people's struggles in uniform. Have you had any conversations as far as his upbringing and what contributed to his own struggles?
So the problem is a lot of the questions I want to ask were never asked because he passed away when he was 63. So I was about 29 years old at the time, much earlier than before I sort of had my own awakening about why I was the way I was. So I wish I could ask him, and I wish I could ask my mom, who have both passed away. But I did talk to my sisters, and there's a big difference between being 4 years old when this stuff is going on and being 13 years old in terms of your understanding. My earliest memories were drawing pictures of football helmets at a place that wasn't my home because my mom had kicked my dad out for a period of time, and realizing that this was just kind of weird. They did work it out and she did take him back. And I think that led to his sobriety. And, one of the things that really touched me was at his funeral, we had a lot of people come out and say, "Hey, your dad saved my life. Your dad was my sponsor and he stopped me from drinking and was always there." And this was stuff that we had never heard about. We had no idea that he was out doing this stuff and helping people. He just kind of kept it to himself and kept that that confidentiality that is important there. But we had no idea that he was out helping other alcoholics into recovery, and that was really touching. So, knowing what I know now, that clearly was an impact on my life as drinking and where I ended up. And I think there's general agreement that first responders, military, especially the special ops guys, probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for some level of childhood trauma. And I think that's where a lot of us start to put the armor on, is in our childhood. And it's a lifetime of learning how to take that off.
That is such a beautiful story to hear, though, that your dad not only was able to overcome his own addiction, but then use his story to be a beacon of light. And you obviously hear this a lot in AA with the sponsors, but it really does illustrate, this concept that I'm sure we're going to unpack as well. But I literally wrote about in my most recent book is that generational trauma. There are these dominoes that if we go back these generations, you start to see them very clearly. Well, this is my parents' upbringing. This is my grandparents' upbringing. This is my great grandparents' upbringing. And now we're in, World War II, World War I, and, this cycle. But if you can see it and if you can do the work and you can heal from it, they say hurt people, and we see that all over the world, but heal people, heal people. And I think what a beautiful testament to your dad that the work he did, he stopped that domino, somewhat from falling, if not onto you and your sisters, certainly the generation after.
Yeah. And it was really, it's one of those things you don't recognize really at the time. And, his background was he had an older brother who died when he was 17 years old. So the brother was still in high school. My dad was about 13, I think, at the time. And never spoke about it. That was something that we didn't talk about. That was in the 1950s. And so there's no doubt that some forgiveness comes when you recognize your parents are also human and are doing this for the first time, living their first life, and don't have all the answers. And being a father now, I certainly recognize, like, oh my God, this is tough to do. Even if you have the most perfect, pristine background and no trauma, it is a challenge to do. So I appreciate him. And in fact, I have a picture over here. The last picture we have of him is him holding this sign. I don't know if you can see. It says, "I'm so proud of you."
Yep.
So that's the sign that he had. I had a really tough year back in 2004, and I had thrown myself into running. And so I decided I needed a goal. So I decided I was going to run the New York City Marathon. And my folks came out, super proud of me. And they took that picture of him in the hotel room before they went down to cheer me on in Central Park. And he got on a plane that night and flew home and went straight to the hospital, never came out. So that's the last picture we have of him alive, is passing the message that he's proud of me. So that's certainly for me, talk about a role model. Now, I understand everybody. I had trouble with alcohol myself. And so I understand that we're human. But the fact that he changed to go help people, I think was a huge impact, huge modeling of behavior for my life.
Absolutely. Well, going back to your first profession, then, talk to me as you reflect back now, the pros of accounting, and then what were some of the cons, if any?
There is a baseline knowledge that you get to understand about how businesses work, and that's something that it's really hard to see from the outside. So accounting is organized. It's it's very professional. I was doing audits on companies, and for me, it was a great lesson in responsibility. I was put in charge of a team of about 25 people when I was 25, 26 years old, which is a pretty big team to lead. And you have to do it. You have to step up to the task at a young age. So I appreciated that. I learned a ton. But I also learned that the world of accounting is largely backward looking. We're looking at history of things of what happened. And I wanted to move to something that was more forward looking, more strategic, and more kind of aggressive and exciting. So in 2000, I got a job at, I made a big move from looking at accounting to working on Wall Street. So I went to an investment banking firm and I started working on mergers and acquisitions. And that was in 2000. Now, around that time, I was dating a woman in New York. I always thought it'd be really cool to live in the city. So I made the move from the West Coast to the East Coast in 2000. And one of the best moves I ever made in my life. I absolutely love New York. And so the relationship I moved for lasted about 6 months once I got to the city, as they often do. And I stayed in New York working in investment banking until early 2005. And then I moved home. I sort of had a couple of life moments in that sort of time period that I think really directed me to go on a different path. And I started this period that lasted over 20 years. Well, it's still going on, of sort of searching. And so that was a super critical time for me as I got a little bit older and a little bit more mature, of trying to figure out what life was supposed to be all about.
Going back to the taxes for a moment, for people listening, I don't know if this was even your world at all, but what are some of the common mistakes or common myths that the average person understands or misunderstands as far as their own taxes?
So there's a lot of subjectivity in taxes. So, and it's a risk assessment. So how aggressive you are in your taxes, you could be totally fine. You may not ever get audited, and nobody is sort of the wiser. There's people who are very by the book on how they interpret the tax code, and those people pay more taxes. So there is strategy in minimizing taxes. There's jail for avoiding taxes. And there's a really fine line between the two. And so your accountant, if you use an accountant to like do your taxes, understand that you have to get to know them a little bit like a therapist in terms of their attitudes towards risk and what kind of risk they're going to put you in. So some people don't ever want to be close to breaking a rule. Some people don't ever want to be subject to interpretation, and others are like, let's go, man. Let's get as much money back as we can. And so for personal taxes, that's a very important thing. And there's a lot you could do to plan ahead to minimize your taxes. And whether that's, your deferred comp, whether it's, have some side businesses, all that stuff is things that people who are young and starting out, especially firefighters, ought to know a little bit more about.
Absolutely. I didn't realize we had a really good lady in California, and all the things that we were legally allowed to write off, obviously the educational material and some of the firefighting gear that we bought that year. And yeah, you can be naive. And I think I still am to a point, and probably pay a lot more than you should. But I think the fear of obviously being audited and getting into trouble, I think probably leans a lot of people to overpaying on taxes, I would assume.
Yes. Yeah. And they're very rarely are they going to come back and say, oops, you paid us too much. Here's your money back. Right. So.
Well, with that, what about, when we talk about the abuse of, government support, excuse me, a lot of times it's aimed at people on welfare, food stamps, government housing, etc. But the, lesser discussed side is the, the pilfering when it comes to businesses and the underpaying of taxes there. Were you exposed to any of that at all?
Sure. And, there's a fundamental problem is that if you are a CPA or a tax attorney, and if you go to work for the government, that's a very noble thing, but you're going to make about half as much as you do in the private sector. So just like investment banking, where we see similar things of fraud and schemes, those are incredibly smart people. And while we often paint them with a brush of they're fraudulent, they're immoral, what we really have are people who are more comfortable working on the fringes of what is allowed and what's not. And so the almighty dollar plays a huge role in this. If you want, you see the best and brightest minds oftentimes where the most money is. And that's just the rules of the game today. Very rarely do you see the best and brightest going in to enforce those laws. And so we have people who, when I was working in investment banking, there were analysts that would just cover 3 companies and that's it. And so there's this idea that the average civilian can go make money in the stock market. And for me, that's pretty absurd. You're playing against some people who pay millions of dollars just to have their hub of technology closest to the stock exchange in order to make that 0.1 second difference in hitting that trade. You don't stand a chance. What you can do is, a rising tide lifts all ships, but the idea that you're going to outpick one of the professional pickers is impossible. And it goes to the level of there were guys I know who made friends, made big gifts to people in manufacturing facilities in China to get information about how many screens were being made for this or for that, so that they can know ahead of time of how well that company's doing. Some of that is totally fine. Like if you want to go do that level of research, that's totally legal. Some of it rises to insider trading when you get that information from the company. So some of these guys were just super aggressive researchers, and hats off to them. They made a ton of money doing it. But the idea that, you or me can stand a chance against those guys is absolutely crazy at this point in the stock exchange. So you hope that the economy goes up overall, and that's how folks like you and me can prosper and make money. I promise you this though, when they're talking about it around the table at the firehouse, it's almost always too late. Like the firefighters love a good outside financial thing, and it's almost always a bad idea.
I never got into that because I saw the guys glued to their screen. And I'm like, that this does not look like fun. Like I will just go, earn extra money somewhere else. And,
yeah.
Same with the investment properties. I had friends that had rentals, and they were just constantly pulling their hair out, and tenants were leaving it all destroyed and not paying. And I'm again, I'm happy with the small amount of money that I make. I don't need to make more, because I think that there's money and then there's value, and those things I think are very different.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's run the gamut at the firehouse, and before 2008 it was investment properties in the Central Valley. We're going to go through the roof. And then it was, Bitcoin. And then there were these bridge loans, and then, people are buying silver, and there's all kinds. There's always the latest scam around the firehouse. And generally my feeling is if you're talking it at the firehouse, you're too late to the party and the value has already occurred. So I stay away from all those stuff.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, I think there was one famous like How to Get Rich Quick book on QVC years ago, and then they discovered that guy got rich by selling books on how to get rich. That was actually his money.
Exactly.
So there we go.
I think the most interesting thing out there right now is those funds that follow the politicians trading. I think that is probably the best place to get wealthy, because I see what the politicians are making on the stock market, and it beats all the hedge funds. So
I love that idea of putting NASCAR style, stickers on politicians so you know who's bought them.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, speaking of Wall Street, I've had a few guests that have been on there. Firstly, what was the goal? What was your kind of motivation to moving to that world? And then, if I'm assuming there was an element of obviously the financial side, did you find it satisfying when you were actually on Wall Street making good money?
So, the sticker price is what you see first off. So you see young folks, in their mid to late 20s, pulling down at that time, $1 million, $1.5 million at that age is not uncommon. And that attracts you. And for people who are competitive, like I am, that's something you want to, that's a race you want to get into. It wasn't too long after that, maybe a couple years in, that my interest really changed, and I was helping small businesses sort of plan for the next generation. So for instance, I got to help this one company named S.I.R.E.N. They do ski gear. And the owner at the time had started it 30 years ago for his son, who was a ski racer, and it was a little catalog business. And it was time for him to move on. He was like 77 at the time. He wanted to secure his future. He wanted to know where that business was going to go. And so helping somebody like that, who it was their life work, make the most amount of money for their company was fantastic. And I love that. But as you move up in promotions in the investment banking world, I was exposed to less and less of those opportunities, and you start to manage the managers. So I had several people working for me, and my contact with those business owners was less and less. And so that was disappointing for me. And it became way less fun and way less meaningful. And so, I talked about the challenging year in 2004. I had been engaged to a woman who I came home after being at work for 36 hours to hit a deadline. And she basically gave me the ring back and said, "Hey, this is not right. I'm not ready. You're not the right one. I'm just going to leave." And never really got an explanation of it. And so that's when I was like, man, I see these senior people in my firm who I don't want to be the fat 50-year-old who dies at his desk from a heart attack. And that was certainly a path that I was going down. I lived in Manhattan during 9/11. I knew some people who died in the towers. And I think that really started this, what am I doing here? What am I doing with my life? And I, failed relationships, getting fat, going out and partying super hard for the one night a week that I could go out, and not really having any meaningful relationships. So I was definitely seeking at that point in my life. And my dad's passing away really sort of drove me to actually do something about it and make a change. So
what did that initial change look like?
So in investment banking at that time, and I don't know what it's like now, but it was expected that you would be around the office for 6.5 days a week. So, I would get usually Sunday afternoons off, and the rest of the time I'd be around the office. And it was, you eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner at your desk, and you're busy doing stuff. So I'm sorry, what was your question one more time?
That's okay. You mentioned that there was a change after losing your father. So what did that look
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. So one of the things that I always thought about, I had a dog when I was 12, and you think back about as a parent, like all the little things you do, but for me, my parents getting me my own dog when I was 12 was really life-changing. So I'm sitting there in the office, unhappy, wondering what I would do. What would I do if I didn't have to be here? And the one thing that kept coming back to me is I want a dog. And so if I wasn't here, I wanted a dog, and I wanted to go up and ski. And so when my dad passed away, my mom was alone in the house, and I said, screw it. This is the time. It's kind of now or never. And so I moved back home, and I got a dog, and that dog's name was Deuce. And I spent most of the winters kind of up in Tahoe. Now at Palisades, it was Squaw Valley at the time, and I skied and I raised a puppy. And having lived through 9/11, I was actually at Candlestick Park for the Loma Prieta earthquake back in 1989. I had seen what search dogs had done. I didn't know anything about them, but I had seen, and I was always kind of intrigued, like, hey, that's pretty cool. So I decided I'd figure out how to go to one of those trainings. And I went to one of those trainings, and that's the first time I ever saw something. I'm like hooked, man, like hook, line, and sinker. Like I need to be doing that. And it was kind of no looking back from there. So it started with this simple idea that all I want is to not be in this office. I don't really know what I do want, but I want a dog. And me and that dog, we had tons of adventures. And so that was Deuce. That led me into search and rescue. And that really was like the start of how can I do this professionally? Is there another world outside of being in the office? So after a couple of years, I did go back to investment banking for a little bit because I wanted a little bit of a nest egg. And then but I was really full time in the search and rescue world. And so that was wilderness stuff. And so in 2000, that was like right around 2005, I started that. My mentor in that space was a woman named Elise, who became my wife in 2009. And man, it changed my life because there was this idea of like, let's go do this professionally. What else is out there? So I went and got my EMT, and I'm like, hey, I kind of like medicine. And then I said, well, I'm not doing anything right now. I'm not really working. I'll go get my paramedic license. And so I got my paramedic license. I was lucky enough to know some people on the FEMA task force locally, and they invited me to do my internship at their fire department. And then a couple years later, I get hired where I am right now. So that dog really kind of led me on a whole nother path. I was lucky enough to be on the FEMA task force before I was ever a firefighter. So it was really the idea of knowing I just don't want this anymore that led me to do something different.
So talk to me about the kind of scope of practice of the search and rescue canine side, because I mean, I know, in law enforcement, obviously you got everything from, the SWAT dogs all the way through to the beagles that are sniffing your suitcase in the airport.
Sure. Yeah.
Talk to me about that spectrum in our world.
Okay, so in California, the search dog world is divided into the law side and the fire side. So on the law side, you have essentially the folks who go looking for individual missing people. So that's the lost hiker, the dementia patient, you name it, the little kid who's lost in the woods, the abduction cases, anything that may have a criminal nexus. And it's generally volunteer driven. And you never hear very rarely do you hear about those searches. And they encompass everything from area search dogs, which will find anybody in 100 acres, to cadaver dogs who will find buried small sources, for a murder scene or something like that. They have the trailing dogs, which everybody thinks of the bloodhound, but there's not very many bloodhounds around anymore. They're mostly shepherds and Malinois and Labradors. And that's sort of the different ones they have on the law side. On the fire side, and I live in both worlds, so my dog is certified on in both. So the fire side is tightly connected to the FEMA Urban Search and Rescue teams and the state Urban Search and Rescue teams. So when you think of the fireside dogs, those are the ones that come look for you after the building collapses on you. So we're looking for, instead of an individual who went and got themselves lost, we're looking for people who were victims of a collapsed structure from an earthquake, a hurricane, a mudslide, a fire. And in that fire world, we have, it's a clear separation between the live find dogs, who only search for missing living human beings, and the cadaver dogs, and they only search for missing deceased human beings. And so most of the work these days is in that human remains detection, and that's everything from the Paradise Fire, where we lost 85 people, to the Montecito mudslides, to this summer we were down in Texas for the flooding that happened on the Guadalupe River. So that's how the worlds kind of break out. And we have lots of people who kind of do both, but most people kind of choose which one they want to do, whether it's wilderness or the fireside.
What does the training look like? I've had 2 German Shepherds now that can't find their own yellow tennis ball for love nor money if I throw it in a direction that they weren't looking at. How do you take a canine and get such acute senses from them when dogs exist like mine too that clearly don't have the potential to be that kind of dog?
Yeah, well, you can probably hear a couple dogs behind me now, and these are my current search dogs that are playing, but they it starts with genetics. And so what we have are dogs that make terrible pets. Like, I love my guys, but they're not that fun to live with around the house. Like, if you don't give them something to do or crate them, they will find something to do. And it's never anything you want them to be doing. They're never folding the laundry, right? So it starts with genetics. The dogs typically are, on the firesides, Labrador, Shepherds, Malinois, Border Collies, the sort of mid-size working breeds. And it's really an art in choosing the dogs. We're going through a change now in the search and rescue dog world on the fire side, where there's a lot of pre-trained dogs. It's getting closer to the police model, where somebody else trains the dog. You come in, you get a 2 or 3 week handler course, and then boom, you're on the street with your dog. I have a master's in history. My thesis was on the origin and evolution of search dogs in California. So at one point in time, they were all search dogs, and now we've really gone into this world of specialization. So how we train them has changed. It used to be more of like a Keeler method, correction based. Now we're really into more play based models, where the dogs have fun. We pick dogs with incredible drive for their toy. And really the difference that we see in selection between the law enforcement wilderness dogs and the USAR dogs is their ability to be comfortable on the rubble pile. So the rubble pile is an unforgiving, uncomfortable place, unnatural for dogs to be on. And so to take it from that flat wilderness sort of thing into a vertical structure that's wobbly and uncomfortable, that's where we see the differences between the two dogs. So there's wonderful organizations out there like the Disaster Search Dog Foundation here in California that take dogs from shelters, and dogs that have all those traits. They usually are like escape artists. They've usually torn up the house. They have all this, people call it energy, but it's really kind of drive to go do something. And they turn them into useful members of society by making them search and rescue dogs, and they get to go live in the firehouse. So it's fantastic programs like that. I've sourced my dogs from people like Michael Ellis, who I think is the best trainer in the world, who breeds Malinois. And then I've also found them from people who, just being in the dog world, say my dog is too much and has killed a couple cats here in the Castro, and that's not good. And so, do you want this dog? And I said, yeah, I'll take that dog. That's something I could work with. And so we kind of find them all over the place.
Sounds like firefighters too, like high energy, breaking things a lot. Like I should probably become a firefighter.
Yeah, it's not too different. They rest a little bit less than the firefighters, but yeah, it's not too different.
Well, talk to me then about some of the notable deployments. I had Beth Bowersox on a few years ago now. She was a dispatcher, one of the dispatchers at the Paradise Fire, for example. So
Hmm.
had some powerful kind of stories from, Katrina and some of these other huge events. What are some of the stories that you witnessed firsthand? Not only the dog, but obviously yourself, the handler as well.
So one of the big ones we went to was a Montecito debris flow, and that was one where I believe there's 23 people killed, and they had trouble finding like the last five or six. The debris path was over a mile long. It went from the top of the mountain all the way down to the ocean, and it was mud everywhere. So it's one of those things that you're always fighting the last war in your training, meaning we in California, we're all expecting the big earthquake, right? With the concrete tilt up. Now, when you put us in an environment of just mud, that's you can't create that training environment. And so that was notable because my dog George and I had um, embarked on a different way to train, and there was some really good validation that our training methods worked. I've always been blessed with having a mentor appear at the right time in my life. And so I had taken sort of a right hand turn away from sort of traditional training methods to work with this mentor of mine. And on that search, you never really know if you're doing the right thing. It's sort of like parenting until you get into the real world. And unfortunately, the truth with search and rescue dogs is a lot of times the lifeline dogs get maybe one deployment in their lifetime. I've retired two dogs with zero deployments. So to get out and do it in the real world at Montecito was a really big one for us, and we were successful there. So that validated some training methods for me. After that was the Paradise Fire. The Paradise Fire was I'd responded. My first disaster was a San Bruno pipeline explosion, which killed a bunch of people here in San Bruno. They thought it was a plane crash, but it was really a PG&E main that exploded. And that was one thing. That was like a localized, like one block of a neighborhood burned down, 2 blocks of a neighborhood. Paradise was, three cities that were destroyed, whether it was Paradise, Concow, or Magalia. And that became mentally challenging because we would drive up from Chico and the entire town was nuked. There was just disaster everywhere. And it would be 20 minutes of driving and all it was burnt homes. So the sheer size of that was challenging. The mental part of it when we arrived there as part of my task force was there were 1,500 people reported missing at the time in 15,000 homes. So you're thinking in your mind, I should be finding somebody in one every 10 homes or so. And when you don't, that becomes sort of a mental mind fuck, so to speak, because you wonder what's wrong with your dog. Are we doing this right? Are we missing people? We are going to be the only chance of actually finding people because we don't have enough teams to come back and do a secondary sweep. Well, it turned out there was 85 people who died in that fire. And so the dogs did well. There were some big improvements that needed to happen afterwards. But it was certainly notable for me just based on the size. And that started me down a path of there should not be such a big divide between the law enforcement wilderness handlers and the fire urban search and rescue handlers. And I'm still fighting that battle today. There's always that, cops versus firefighters thing. This, dog people are notoriously mean to each other. And they like their little cliques. And I hate that. And I think it does no service to the search dog practice to have these little camps rather than all of us working together. So Paradise was a big one. And then we did, my team went down to the Palisades fire. I was not a part of that because we had some staffing issues at my department, so they wouldn't let me go. And then the Texas floods, that was a 21-day deployment. So that was a very long deployment for the dogs. we learned how to work in some heat, and we're asked to do things that we don't normally do, like work off of boats and things like that. So it seems like every time we get a pretty big disaster, there's huge lessons to learn, and you go back and change your training. So
Yeah, it's amazing to hear because it's just an area that we don't hear very much about at all. We had one of my captains in Anaheim when I worked out in California was an arson investigator, and he had an arson dog, I think.
yep.
No, I think it was a USAR dog. Actually, I take that back. But going back to what you're talking about, this is the problem, I think, I think this is one of the symptoms of the downward spiral of the fire service with recruitment and retention, which I'm assuming was probably behind why you didn't go to the Palisades,
Mm-hmm.
is we have counties and cities that don't talk to each other, FD. We have FDPD, and there's one mission, to protect the people that we serve in this entire nation. So the moment you create these silos and you break down communication, the higher chance there is of an Uvalde or a Parkland or whatever God forbid, disaster where a lot of people died, partly because of lack of leadership and communication. So it makes perfect sense. I mean, I had Mike Gusby on the show, who's LAPD canine guru. I'm sure you and him in a room would have all kinds of things and knowledge to share. If we can break down these silos and these walls and get rid of the egos that exist in some of these communities, so that we can just, as you said, the rising tide lifts all ships. It's the same in our profession too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned there's a couple mentors that just showed up at the right time, and one was a guy named Don Yarnell, and Don started the LA Police Dog program back in the 80s, and he had a contract to teach the Oakland PD, and so he actually stayed at my house, and for months at a time. And so every night would be like sitting on the knee of a master, and he would explain this entirely different training methodology, which I employ with my dog George when we went to Montecito. So every once in a while, you need somebody to step up and sort of break down some barriers and say, we're all doing the same thing here, guys. Like we all need to be a little bit better. And so that's what I'm trying to do. It's one of my pet projects as a search and rescue dog handler, is to create the bridge to the other side, because there's nothing better than when we show up in Texas to be able to pick up the phone and go, hey, Shirley, I know you're here as well. What's really happening? What do we need to know? What do we need to bring? And have a friendship there, and not this sort of, I hate to say dick measuring, but there's a dick measuring contest that happens at all of these types of things. And it's terrible.
Absolutely. Well, that's obviously the dog specific deployments. Let's just kind of walk through where you up to where we are now as far as the other side. So notable calls, fires, etc. in your career that didn't involve the canine.
So I work as a captain paramedic right now on our USAR in my city. And so most of my calls that I would say are notable are on the medical side. The fires have become so rare that it's hard to even, call ourselves a fire department, really, because we do so much more. So I've had calls with, obviously the kids calls. Nobody likes those. But when I went out on PTSD for a while, and one of the calls I remember was a 13-year-old who hung herself. And I was working as the medic on the USAR at the time. So I was the second medic in, and she hung herself in the laundry room of their house. And I work in a nice, really nice area, like the medium home price is a couple $1,000,000. She hung herself in the laundry room, this 13-year-old girl, with a dog leash. And something about that dog leash, I just could not get out of my mind. And I can't recall a lot of details of that call. I can't tell you exactly who was there. I can tell you the medicines I pushed. I can tell you what the mom sounded like screaming. And, we oftentimes talk about what we see with these PTSD things, but for me, it's always the smells and the sounds that bring me back. And we don't talk about that too much, about walking into the Home Depot and the click of their AC unit is the same click right before the tones drop at one of our stations. And all of a sudden you get that adrenaline dump just from that going off. So like I said, just get back to your question. There's been a ton of medical calls. I've had jumpers. I've had train versus pedestrian. I've had lots of those. But through my own therapy and my own growth and some of the things I've done, what I've learned is that very few of the things that really bother us go back to actually going in the rooms again. A lot of it comes from childhood and the armor we've put on and or the relationships that hurt us. And so, yeah, every firefighter you've had on the show has the terrible calls that, none of us really want to talk about again. But it's more than that I think causes a lot of the issues for first responders.
Absolutely. Well, walk me through that then. You mentioned about going out on PTSD for a while. What was your kind of roller coaster mental health journey prior to psychedelics?
So I mentioned that I was kind of searching starting back from like 2001. I was in New York for 9/11. I was down by the pile on September 12th, and they were asking for iron workers and EMS, and those people were being allowed to access the pile, and nobody was asking for a banker or CPA. And I felt a sense of uselessness, that I had no real skills, no hard skills. Like nobody needs an audit right now. Nobody needs a fundraiser right now. So that's sort of where it started. And then it was this seeking thing. It was getting the dog and then thinking, okay, I'll be a helper. I'll go be a firefighter. And that was fantastic until 2016 when I hurt my back for the first time. And I was off for about 9 months with an L5S1 microdiscectomy surgery. So not a major surgery, but a surgery nonetheless. And part of that was inability to sleep. So back then we had Fitbits that I would wear to kind of just track because I was curious. And for a couple months, it would be an hour and a half to 2 hours a night of sleep. And the rest of the time I was uncomfortable. So as part of this in 2016, it was, here's some Norco, some painkillers. Let us know if this doesn't work. So you proceed from the 5 Norcos to the 10 Norcos. And, by the time I was ready to come back to work, they were giving me morphine pills. Just, here's a couple bottles after your surgery. Just, try not to take a bunch at the same time because it could kill you. And you don't want to get addicted. Nobody sets out for addiction, but there is a physical addiction that is inevitable that comes with that. So, at that time I was not sleeping. I was definitely addicted. And there was that question about whether I could come back or not. Who am I if I'm not a firefighter? Where's my community? Me and my wife were not getting along. My ex-wife, we're not getting along very well at the time. So there's all these things sort of happening. And I felt very, very lost. Kind of like a who am I moment. So, the best thing I could do was to get myself back to work and give me something to do, I thought. So, after my back surgery, my back wasn't hurting anymore, but I was definitely taking all those pills. And they said, well, you can't go back to work until you're off all these meds. And so I said, all right, well, I could do that. So I locked myself in a room at my house for about 2 weeks. And about a day and a half in, I said, man, I think I'm coming down with the flu. And it hit me then that I was dope sick. Like I was a legit addict. And so I was able to stick with it. And I haven't taken those type of painkillers since, but it was definitely a humbling thing that who I thought very highly of, could get myself addicted to something without me even really knowing it was happening. And all of a sudden it was like oh shit, I'm freaking addicted to these. Like I have a physical problem getting off of these. So I thought everything would be great. I went back to work and had the tough calls and got sort of put into more senior positions in the department, and something was still nagging me. And, at the time, my marriage wasn't particularly good, and I didn't have some of the tough conversations. And I met a woman. She made me feel very alive, had an affair, and it was the worst thing I could ever do. Like, it was such a violation of who I was as a person, and such a letdown to myself that I could let myself fall that far, and I could do something that I never thought I would ever do. And that's have an affair with somebody else and step out on my wife. And I don't think things would have worked out with my ex-wife, but this certainly was, the hammer that cracked it all. And I wish I hadn't done that. But what did happen in that was that feeling of being alive, of being loved, was overwhelming. And it made me realize that had been missing for a long time. So the thing about putting the armor on is you're protected from the outside, but it also prevents all those feelings from getting through, the good feelings. And it prevents those feelings from coming out. And I was basically numb at the time. And I was doing whatever I could to numb myself, whether that's opioids, whether that's online shopping, whether it's the womanizing. And all of that was to avoid those feelings that were just below the surface, and I've met a lot of guys that will cry in their car at that one song, but would never cry at home talking to their loved ones. And so my wife and I split up. I became one of the statistics of firefighters who have an ex-wife, and that seems like most of us these days. And it was all my fault. And now I was still on that path of like, how did I become that person that would ever step out on my wife? And, we talked about the dog stuff, and the dog world is very, very small. A little bit of time went by. I met my current wife, Angela, who is a saint and is no question the one I should be with. And I was back at work and things were going well. And then I hurt my back again. And this was the second sort of major back injury. And for most people in the fire service, a couple back injuries, a couple back surgeries, you're pretty much done, right? So, at first it's great. I'm in this relationship with Angela, and she's off work because she also has a back injury. Angela is also a firefighter, and happy hour starts at 5, and then happy hour starts at 3, and then it's noon, and before you know it, every time you go to the store, you're having to restock on high noons, and it was like, oh man, I think I got a problem again. Because I would look forward to that drink every day, that first drink. And then I went through a little bit of a change, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to fix this. I'll start using gummies. Gummies are better. The weed is healthier. It's, I'm not taking in all those calories. That'll be better. And then you realize like, I shouldn't need a gummy every day. Like, back to what's wrong with me, what's going on. So the dog world's small. And I had a friend named Jimmy. Jimmy was a dog handler with SEAL Team 6 and now helps working dogs with his nonprofit. And we would have really honest conversations. Jimmy wrote a book called Touching the Dragon, which I read. And in it, he pretty much opens up everything about his failures, what happened to him after he got shot. And he doesn't hold back. And that idea that he could talk about those things that were hurting him, that really inspired me. So Jimmy and I became friends, and Jimmy could see I was hurting, and he sort of put his arm around me and gave me a card and said, hey, here's the number to Martine from Mission Within. Mission Within will help you guys. And so we went down that path, and Angela was the first to go down there and go down to sneak across the border, do the medicine. And the change in her was immediate. And she was kind enough not to overshare her experience. So I did not develop expectations for my own journey, but it's life-changing, man. And when I was through my journey, I was so at peace with everything and very angry that it took knowing like a SEAL Team 6 guy to be able to access this medicine and even hear about it, because nobody was really talking about it back then. And the funding, the finances to be able to go afford to do it. And so that's when Angela and I started the S.I.R.E.N Project, because we could not keep this to ourselves.
Talk to me about after the experience. One of the things that I hear a lot when it comes to psychedelics is, some people will do the journey and then that's kind of it, and the integration piece is missing. And the people that seem to have a lot of success recently, there's the Wisdom Dojo, where they're focusing on the breath work and the meditation and the journaling, and then obviously amplifying the healing that you see. What did you feel immediately post journey? And then, what was your experience as far as continuing that healing without having to keep revisiting journeys all the time?
You touched on integration is the most important piece of this. And so much energy and focus is on the journey itself. And at the end, that's really a very, very small portion of the whole thing. So I knew there was a change in me as soon as I got to the airport in Mexico. And I'll tell you why. Because normally when I'm in an airport, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at, oh my God, what is she wearing? How did she think she can get away with that? Like, who do these people like? Wow, that guy's really fat. And my judgments were gone. I had zero negative judgments. I had this very clear realization that we are all connected. We truly are all brothers and sisters. And that I felt lighter. That desire to judge or put myself higher than other people was gone. And so that's when I knew it was working. And that's when I knew that there really was something to this. The integration part really is where the rubber meets the road, though, because for a lot of people, they talk about the pink cloud, and the first couple weeks after a journey, everything is great and magical, and you're on this elevated feeling while you have all this neuroplasticity going on. But if you don't stick with it and change your underlying habits, then it just becomes an interesting story of the time you went down to Mexico and did drugs. So this is medicine, and this is meant to be like a lifelong thing. And you've never heard anybody in the gym say, I've achieved fitness. I no longer have to come to the gym, right? Yet in mental health, it's, I want to be fixed or cured. And there is no fix, because as soon as you have dealt with that issue that you think you're there for, it opens up four more things that, okay, well, everybody thinks they're coming down because of that one call or that one kid, but it's very rarely about that. It's usually all about something you have been avoiding thinking about for a long, long time. And so that integration is where we make the daily practices change so that you can maintain that feeling and that change in your life. And that starts with, there's the things we do to keep people present. So that could be meditation, that could be horse therapy. For me, it's dog training. But the gratitude practice that we have people learn is really where we see the change. We have 70,000 thoughts a day that go through your brain. About 75% of them are negative thoughts, and about half of those are rumination. So why didn't I do this? Why did I say to that person? Why am I dressed like this? Why am I fat? And that sort of negative talk, your body listens to. And so as we change that to more gratitude practices, we can realize how blessed our life really is, because we all lose it. None of us wake up in the morning and say, I'm so grateful I can open my eyes and see today. I'm so grateful I'm here in this warm bed. I'm so grateful that, when I step off the bed, I have two healthy legs that I could walk to get coffee in my kitchen. We have no appreciation for all the wonderful things we have, especially here in the United States.
I mean, that literally nails it. Yeah, I mean, it really does, because that's when you think about some of the practices that outside of any of these retreats that we're told are good for you. And this is one thing I do every morning is the 5 minute journal, and it literally is forcing you to do that, because I'll sit on my back porch and be three things that I'm grateful for, and after a few days you don't want to repeat it either. So then you're like, well, the birds that I can hear right now, the fact that I have clothes, big one, my child's health. I mean, and then all of a sudden you're reframing everything. And then the kind of, as alluding to where your world was 20 years prior, that consumerism, that worshipping of the holy monopoly, all of a sudden just seems so wrong and ridiculous. But I could not agree more. We are by far the most fortunate company. That's a Freudian slip. Country, on the planet, really, if you look at it, as far as the opportunities, as far as the national wealth, we so fortunate you were born here and not Syria or Gaza, or, insert somewhere where your home might be vaporized as we speak. But we have absolutely lost that. So if these journeys did nothing but reframed your gratitude for what you have, that alone on a mental health element is groundbreaking. Not to mention then starting to address the trauma that you didn't even realize. As I always say, the pee beneath the mattress. When you start seeing that you were so focused on that triple PD fatality that you had, and you didn't realize that your father leaving when you were 5 was actually the biggest, crack in your foundation. Now, I mean, you can just see all the layers of potential healing if, as you alluded to, you see them and then you keep working on them. And then as you turn the page, there's this other thing. Okay, well, let me start leaning into that too as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And my own journey, I have this idea that it'd be great to be finished, but it's never going to be finished. Like there's more and more. And at some point for some of us, it becomes almost fun to take these onion peels off and find out what's underneath, because the simple fact of it, for most Americans, we don't truly know who we are, like who we really, really are. We're more products of the environment and the consumerism and how we were raised and the expectations put on us, and all the things that we were told would make us happy are very rarely the things that actually make us happy.
One thing that I've started talking about when it comes to physical and mental health, all things firefighter health, is if you look at SEAL Team 6, I've had numerous guys from the tier 1 organizations on the show. They have psychologists, nutritionists, strength and conditioning trainers, neuroscientists, all these people working with them to forge the highest level of performance. Now, day in, day out, our first responders are asked to do life-saving interventions, and yet our strength and conditioning psychology conversations are, well, they keep dying. So how do we stop them dying as much? And there's such a chasm between that and performance. So where I'm excited is, well, let's talk about forging performance. And if we do that, the byproduct will be, if anyone's struggling, well, these same tools are going to help pull them from there as well. It's the same conversation.
Yep.
Post journey, what did you and Angela start experiencing as far as your ability to do the job, just your sheer performance post retreat?
So there's man, that's a big one, right? Because like, how does it actually mean anything at the end of the day? So how I was able to do the job, I'd like to start by saying I was able to get back to my job. So during my second back injury, I was also, I took time off for PTSD also through the workers' comp process. In the past, that has sort of been the death of your career, right? Like once you're on a PTSD claim, there are departments that just will never send you back to the line. And I didn't want that to be me. And in fact, even today around my department, I've heard things like, we've never had a PTSD claim. And I'm here like, hey, I did. Like, I'm out there with it. Like, I was on a PTSD claim and I came back. So it's important for people who are out there to not have that idea that you can't come back. So the medicine, number one, helps me get back to my job and get back to my job way faster than I ever would had I gone down the SSRI and talk therapy route. For me, it might not be true for everybody, but for me, it was a much faster route back. But what we don't talk about is how you relate with your environment then. So one of the things the medicine gives you is space between action and reaction. So for firefighters, that can mean I can sit there at a traumatic, chaotic scene and have the presence of mind to be calm and see everything around me and make the right decision, and not the emotional, I'm amped up decision. So that creates a safer place. But what it does on a person to person is my compassion levels for my patients are through the roof. We all have the patient who calls twice a day and never really has anything wrong, the frequent flyer. And those people burn out firefighters. And what I've found is I have way more gas in the tank for some of those calls that are ridiculous. But I also have a lot more compassion for grandma who fell out of bed. And this isn't, 2:30 in the morning, let's get up so we can all get back to bed, get her back in her bed, wham, bam, see you later. I actually, I want her to be, I see her situation and she's alone. And sometimes she just wants to talk to somebody. And that's okay. I can be that person. I've totally reframed how I think about death and the dying process. So, in my journey, I think I experienced what it was like to die. And when people die, they get, a huge rush of DMT is what we've seen. Having experienced that, I get a glimpse of what it was like for them to die, what it's like to feel the expansiveness of the universe, to go into the light. And I can sit with that now. And it's not a sad thing. Death is just part of this. And so, we go on codes and we have every once in a while you're able to make a save, but that's usually not the case. And that's just the realism of the job. And so to sit with that person as they pass and hold space for them while they go through that giant DMT dump that happens as they transition is a blessing and an honor to be able to do. And I don't see that now as I'm the last person and their only chance to live. It's I'm somebody who can help them transition to what is after this. And that has unburdened me from a lot of was it my fault? Should I have done more? Did we do everything? When people need to transition, they transition. And that's good for me to be there as a calm, peaceful, safe place for them to do it, not a chaotic, violent, loud sort of space. And I will do everything I can to save somebody, but I'm also very comfortable that I can be the last person there sitting with them when they die. And that's what everybody deserves.
I had an Australian firefighter on, Matt McLaughlin, who was doing MDMA therapy. And it was actually offered, again, kind of like the workman's comp, which was pretty phenomenal over there. But he had a very similar experience. And he'd had everything from losing his father and actually doing CPR on him all the way through to some of the calls. And it completely reframed him. And it wasn't like we'd heard a lot with MDMA where it's kind of, dampering the response, but it's the talk therapy that goes along with it that's really, making the biggest impact. It was actually the experience, and he didn't have a lot of talking, but he revisited some of these tragic deaths. And even when he was in the military, he had to kill a couple people. And it was turned into that they were grateful for him being there at that point, like you said, to hold space when they were transitioning. So a lot of these different compounds, 5-MeO, DMT, and ayahuasca and MDMA, you're hearing these very similar responses. And I think that compassion and that empathy, what do we hear about? Compassion fatigue. I mean, we all know that burnt out, angry medic that, you have to pull away from the scene before he gets arrested. That's not who we were when we were in fire academy or paramedic school,
Exactly.
And
that's
I think
right.
a really important conversation is knowing that most of us that toe the line in the first responder, in the military, etc., have childhood trauma, and that's okay if it's addressed. So why are we not having the conversation in the first day of orientation, saying the fact that you are here when 99% of the population doesn't want to do this job is admirable, but there are things that you've experienced as you progress through your childhood that we want to start working through the same way as when we PT you on the drill ground, we want to work on your strength and your mobility. So having those conversations, that expectation at the front door, and using counseling sessions to start that conversation, reduce the barrier to entry, and develop a relationship with a counselor, I think would be amazing. And then, as we progress forward, some of these tools that you're talking about being available to process things if needed, now you're taking that trauma that we had when we were young and you're turning it into a superpower and forging a high level of performance as a firefighter paramedic.
I mean, there are some basic changes that I think need to happen in the fire service if we want to be able to continue, because we certainly have a recruiting crisis, and that's because people are smart, right? Like, we've done a great job of talking about our cancer rates. We've done a great job of talking about our divorce rates. Now people are talking about the mandatory rates that happen for their overtime, and we've in California changed the pension system so you can't retire until you're 57. And so we're at a point where there's no point for them applying until they're 27, at which point you've learned that, hey, cancer can be a real thing. And you've learned that, hey, maybe I'm already a manager at Google making $400,000 a year. It's hard to transition to a government paying job. And now we've been better at talking about the mental health that comes with this. So we have this underlying recruiting process, because just like fire prevention, we've done a good job out there telling people about the problems of the profession. And so, to me, if we can have a day one of Fire Academy, let's talk about resiliency. Let's talk about building your community of people that are not just other first responders, not other cops and firefighters who are outside and have sort of normal lives. And let's talk about which therapists you want to start seeing. So here's a list of people that we think are culturally competent. Choose from one here or choose from somewhere else, but you're going to do a phone call and get to know them, and you're going to put their phone number in your phone, and that's normal. And then we need to normalize these conversations around the kitchen table where, we solve all the problems, but one thing we don't really talk about is, wow, man, that call really, I had trouble sleeping last night after that call. You don't hear that still. And so, we've done things where I will try to take certain parts that I think can be talked about, that we talk about in our retreats, and do a gratitude practice. Okay, everybody go around the table. If you feel like it, say one thing you're grateful for today. But we are so far behind the curve now. Suicide rates are up 500% for first responders. Even when they occur in departments, there's not always significant change that happens. We still want to sweep it all. We don't even know the number of suicides there are, right? So we don't have that VA where they can follow people and retirees and say, hey, we don't have a 22 or 44 suicides a day. We don't know how big the problem is. And so that would be a huge start, is to actually see what the facts are and accept the facts for what they are, and not pretend like they're not happening, or not pretend it's not going to happen to us, because it is going to happen to us. And so one of the great things for me about being in this space is I entered the fire service thinking I was going to go save some people, that whole hero thing, not knowing what it's actually about. And there is no doubt that I will save more people through the work that we do at the S.I.R.E.N Project than I ever will at a fire or on an EMS call. And that makes me really close to the trauma, and it gives me a lot of good feelings that I'm actually making a difference.
I've said the same thing, obviously transitioning out, and I left simply because I realized that you can't force change from within the castle walls. You got to get outside and knock them down with a battering ram. But
yep.
it's that force multiplier, like the Green Berets talk about. If I run one call as a firefighter paramedic, then that's amazing. But the moment I leave, another warm body is going to be there. What can I
Hmm.
do to help the fire service in general so that, hundreds of thousands of people can run calls and then, have a healthy career? And, I want to get into the S.I.R.E.N Project, but this is why I beat the drum so much with the work week, is knowing that sleep deprivation is behind, suicide, addiction, depression, divorces. I mean, when you tell your kids you can't go home, you tell your spouse you can't go home, you don't think that has an issue. So, knowing that that is one of the big pieces as well. All the money that's being lost, the millions and millions and millions of dollars downstream from the overtime that's forced and the lack of retention, you just put in a fourth shift. Now you've added, another entire recovery process. Now people are testing for you again. Now the vacancies are filled, which we're seeing now. I just saw, I think it was Bloomingfield, Illinois, just had a news piece on how their recruitment's gone through the roof now since they transitioned to that new schedule. So you bring that in. Now you talk about the mental health stuff, and now you put in a fitness standard, and now you're just adding layer upon layer upon layer. And to your point, now you're saving all these first responders' lives, who then in turn are going to go in a full career and save numerous lives. And you're going to hopefully help them have, retain a healthy marriage, a great relationship with their children, and then with that domino that we were talking about, which is an absolute, pandemic when it comes to our profession. You stop your own dominoes falling on your children too.
Absolutely. That idea of your children and doing it for your children really reframes how we're looking at it. It's not, I'm not trying to do this to save myself. I'm doing this so I don't pass along all my crap to my son. And the way we look at it is, if there were programs that really look, we were all really good about saying follow the science and trust the science in 2020, right? But we don't do that here. And that's a very frustrating part when we look at things like operator syndrome and now firefighter syndrome, and that fatigue plus musculoskeletal injuries plus the transition to and from work every week, plus working in the environment where you live, all that stuff. We call it PTSD, but because PTSD is in the DSM, but it's much more than that. It really is a syndrome. And Angela and I look at what we do with the S.I.R.E.N Project as sort of like, we're the surgeon at the end of your workers' comp process, right? So if you could have had a resiliency program early in your career, if you had outlets of talking to a therapist throughout your career, you may not ever need to come to see us. But we're here if you need it. But it's not the easy way. And that's what people really need to understand, is that going to do this medicine it's nobody is doing it for fun. It is a rough journey. And it would be great if we were never needed, right? Like, I would love in 5 years if the S.I.R.E.N Project didn't exist, because you can get this through workers' comp and they did it the right way. And we didn't have to go out and beat the drum to raise funds to go help first responders. That would be the ultimate for me. I don't need to be here in 5 years continuing to do this, but it needs to be available. And that's where we come in.
Well, let's talk about that then. So Angela went on the journey, you went on the journey, you realized that this is something that a lot more people need to experience. Talk to me about the creation of the S.I.R.E.N Project, and then let's talk about what you offer the people listening.
Sure. So, we go to Mexico for the medicine. And, when I got back, I just could not believe, like I said, that I needed to know somebody at that level to access this medicine, and that this wasn't something being discussed with my therapist. Like, my therapist never told me, like, hey, why don't you go check out this? We're getting a lot of success down doing psychedelics. Like, I had to go find this myself. And it was only because I'm curious. And a lot of people who are really going through it and in the depths of their depression and PTSD, and they don't have the ability to go figure that out, nor do they have the ability to figure out where to go to do it and who can I trust. So there are places out there that are sketchy. There's a lot of people I know who went to their cousin's best friend's garage down the street to do psychedelics, and that is not the right setting for this. So we go in tribes. We believe healing happens in a community. And so everybody who goes down with us is a first responder of some sort. So that's a firefighter, police officer, dispatch, EMS, search and rescue. But then we also send their spouse, if the spouse wants to go, to a different retreat. We don't send spouses together because a lot of us first responders are really good at thinking that we're holding it together at home and that our spouse doesn't really know how bad it is. Trust me, they know how bad it is. And they know that they've been walking on eggshells around you as well. So the healing has to happen within the family. And we do it down in Mexico because we think that is the right place to do it for a whole host of reasons. And making that pilgrimage is a lot different than what appears to be the future of psychedelics in the United States, where we have a clinic next to your Starbucks and you go do the medicine and then you go home to your kids that day. I don't think that's the right way to do it. So we're set up a little bit differently, but the results we've seen are phenomenal. And I think how you approach the medicine and how you work with the medicine are key components in making sure we have the success we're looking for, which is not 2 weeks, but it's for 2 years or 20 years. And for most of our respondents, this is one of the most significant events of their life that ranks close to their child or their wedding day or their parents dying.
I had a firefighter that I was connected to, and he went to a retreat. This one is in the US, but it's in a church, it's sacrament. It's very much the same kind of experience that you're talking about. It just happened to be domestic. And he ended up talking to him after, and he said it was a 2-day experience. The first day he was like, he did the medicine. He's like, this is bullshit. And this is a person who had struggled between sobriety and, and addiction. And the conversation basically was, if this doesn't work, then he's pretty much done, meaning, he's going to take his own life. So day one, nothing. This is bullshit. This is stupid. It's not working. I knew it was all, snake oil. And he goes to me, but James, on day two, just kind of like you alluded to, he said, including the birth of my own children, this was the most powerful experience of my life. And he went from, alcoholism to the other side again, on this firm platform again. So I've heard those stories over and over again. I know that there's three people that went through the cohort through the podcast, at least two of my guests on here that have gone through the S.I.R.E.N Project, and I had the same exact phone calls with them. What a powerful experience it was. So I know people whose lives you have saved, literally, and it's so amazing to hear. Before we go to the kind of financial side, talk to me about the history of the medicine and which ones you use in Mexico.
Okay, so I'm a history guy, like I mentioned. I got my master's in history this last year through Harvard, and so I get really intrigued by how some of this stuff really works. So I'm going to go back a little bit, but we use psilocybin and we use 5-MeO-DMT, which is the toad, and that's our usual ceremony. Every once in a while, we'll do an ayahuasca ceremony, but what most people will be receiving. Again, we don't decide if people get the medicine. Our facilitator down in Mexico decides whether you will actually get the medicine. We just send people on the retreat. And so, when you look at psilocybin, if you go back to 1492, Columbus discovers North America, maybe, but we'll go with the history book version. He goes back, and, the Pope was sort of the king of the world at the time, and he had a lot of power. So Pope Alexander creates this papal bull called the Intercatera, which basically divides the rest of the world between Portugal and Spain. And so he said, Spain, you get everything sort of west of this. Portugal's everything east of that. Go forth, conquer, spread the religion, and make sure all the savages out there become Catholics. So Spain does that. And Cortez heads to Mexico and in 1521 conquers the Aztec people in Mexico City. And so we have this now state where the natives, the Aztecs, are forced to convert, and their practices go away. So we have a couple friars who write about it. This is how we know about it. And Bernardino de Saguan was one of them. And he wrote about mushroom ceremonies where they were using local mushrooms for medicinal purposes. And during these ceremonies, people would laugh, they would cry, they would dance. And they decided that that was no good because nobody should have a direct route to speak to God if they're not going through the priests in the church. So it became banned shortly after the conquest of Mexico in 1521. And it went underground. And we don't see it reemerge until the 1950s with Maria Sabina, who was a Mazatec healer, who let a Westerner into one of those. That person's name was Howard Wasson. He was an investment banker from New York, an amateur sort of mycologist who had read the writings of that friar and decided he wanted to go look for these magic mushrooms. And he did. And he was invited into this ceremony by Maria Sabina under some kind of false pretenses that he was looking for his son. His son was missing. He had needs, and with a promise that he would never tell anybody that he did this. Well, Howard Watson went back to New York, and he wrote a big article in Life magazine that was published in, I think, 1957. And from then on, it was like a mad rush to get down to the Mazatec region to meet Maria Sabina. And you had everybody from the Beatles to you name it down there trying to get this psychedelic experience. And the people of Mexico had something that they were protecting for 500 years, essentially stolen from them and given to the world. And for me, that sort of colonizing effect is something that we need to be careful of. And so we do our retreats in Mexico because we use healers that have that lineage of 500 years plus of holding this wisdom and how the medicine works. And to me, that pilgrimage of it being sort of a pain to get down to Mexico, it takes a day. It's not like doing it at a resort spot here, but it is important to your own healing process that you go down there, you make the pilgrimage for yourself. And these indigenous locals perform, it's very ceremonial, everything from a sweat lodge to a flower bath to hape to the medicine itself is all done very respectfully. And we use the local indigenous people to do so because they deserve it, right? They've held this medicine for a long, long time. And I don't think it should be this idea that you have the right to heal in America, to me, is a bit of hogwash. You don't have the right to anything. These medicines were a gift. And when you start saying you have rights to anything, that changes it. We are incredibly blessed that God, the greater power, the great spirit, has placed this medicine here for us to heal. And so I don't want medicine served, and I hate to say this, but by a white dude who's been to 3 ceremonies. And now the medicine told him he needs to be a healer. Because in that we see a lot of ego. Now, there are a lot of great providers here in the United States and a lot of people who do it, in my opinion, the right way. So I'm not trying to disparage them, but for us, the closer we can do it to the source of the medicine, the more authentic and real it is. And so we use a wonderful facilitator. Her name is Dr. Andrea Lucy, somebody you should definitely get on the show. And she is the granddaughter of curanderos, so healers, from Chile. And she grew up with her grandparents watching them heal. And then when she was 17, she moved to the United States and started working on a Marine base. And she's one of these American success stories where she started learning English, watching Beavis and Butthead, and around a bunch of Marines, working in their gym as like the Zumba instructor, all the way up to being one of the lead people at NICO as a therapist, as a doctor. And so she worked for the Marines, for the DoD, for 30 years before the start of the GWAT, all the way up until about 2018. She was working with wounded veterans until she had her own sort of discussion with her heart that she needed to go serve the medicine in Mexico. And so we use her, and she is fantastic. And I can't imagine doing it any other way.
I was having a conversation with the founder of Ambio, the ibogaine treatment, and Trevor Miller. And what was interesting is if we refine this community, I would say a lot of the people that think that they need the psychedelic treatment wouldn't. If we had that, it takes a village. For example, in our profession, if we got the firefighters the sleep that they need, we got these vacancies filled. So now everyone's going home, one day on, well, I hate that term, 24/72. So they're getting a 72-hour period of recovery. Now there's a fitness standard. So now they're working on their health. They're getting back down to a healthy weight. They're spending quality time with their family. There's a large portion that wouldn't even need, as you said, to go to something more extreme like ibogaine or ayahuasca or etc. And then that frees up that amount for the people that are further down that road, that maybe are starting to struggle with addiction or having suicide ideation and nothing else is working. And I think that's what we need to reserve this for. So there's an amazing opportunity for this psychedelic conversation, in my opinion, to also, begin other healing conversations that kind of middle group that's starting to struggle a little bit, but there are some holistic elements that will pull them away from that and make them, get them back to being healthy again. So therefore, we're not flooding these, plant medicine areas and taking, all the Cambo and all the ibogaine away from the people that should be having it. So I think it's that'll be the next generation now is, having that. And I love that analogy that you use, the surgeon. That's there for, God forbid, that's the only option. But, back injuries, I use foundation training to rehab my back movement, and it worked. And I, deadlift 305 the other day at 51. Not going to win any powerlifting competitions, but post, back injury, no surgery, that's a testament for movement as well. So, but if nothing worked down the road, then yeah, there's the discectomies and, the plates and everything else. So I think this next conversation now is very important. Not only, as you said, who are the people that you would trust to do an actual proper journey with a shaman or a guide so that you can actually, navigate what you're seeing and thinking, but also how then can we use this conversation to empower other tools as well to heal people that really don't need to go and do a deep dive in the psychedelic world.
Yeah, and I think that there's one other thing that we don't really talk about, and that's our retirees. And that group of people, they almost all think, well, I'm going to feel better as I move away from this, and the longer I'm away from my job, the less I'll be bothered by those calls. And almost to a person, it seems to get worse, because not only are the thoughts still there, but you've lost your community where maybe you can talk about it or laugh about it, or the dark humor, and a little bit of your identity has been gone. So, I mean, there is a problem right now that the medicines we use are Schedule 1 drugs. Okay. So that stops a lot of people from seeking them. It's another reason why we do it in Mexico, because then people have not broken United States law, because they're in Mexico. But wouldn't it be a gift to send our retirees off into the next period of their life, their next transition, by giving them the option to seek a healing retreat like what we offer or what other people offer, and to leave that baggage as they transition? I mean, personally, I don't care if I get a stupid axe on a plaque when I retire. Like, I'd rather take that money and use it to something that's going to make me a better person, better for my family, happier, and not carrying this weight around into the next, 10, 20 years of my retirement.
Well, kind of as you were talking about when you were on Wall Street and feeling that need, that purpose, that's what they're losing when they transition out. They lost that identity, lost that tribe, but they've also lost, I mean, we've all had it, that drive home from a shift where you're like, I made a difference today. Like, I can sleep well at night. But also, we all know it. By the time they get to the end of their career, a lot of our veterans are pretty jaded as well. And so you've lost that empathy, you've lost that compassion. So what a beautiful reset that would be. And not to mention, and I'd be curious to get your kind of perspective on this. A lot of people, I think it's the 5-MeO specifically, talk about how they felt like they were connected to the universe, and how all of a sudden, and you kind of touched on it, how death wasn't, their own death wasn't scary to them anymore. And I think that would be important. You've just transitioned out, you're 55, 60, 65, whatever you are. You're past the halfway point now.
Right.
And I think the halfway is a kind of a cushion for a lot of us when we're in our 20s or 30s, where we should be fine. But now I'm 51. My grandma was 105 almost. So I could argue maybe still there, but we're kind of looking down the other end now. So what
Right.
another beautiful gift would be, to reframe what retirement looks like, because it's not, just playing golf every day, waiting to die. You've got so much more to give. But if you're exhausted and you're burnt out and your head is full of trauma, to be able to reset that somewhat, to turn the page for retirement, I agree with you 100%. It would be a beautiful gift.
Yeah, and not to mention, they carry a lot of their coping mechanisms right into retirement, whether that's the drinking or the weed or the, being able to just sort of detach and not really be present. So, having people go down there gives them the gift of presence once again, so that they can actually be at home and be with their family and not off in the world, right? So I think it's a beautiful gift that we owe them, but they have to also be ready to accept it.
Because you kind of alluded to what I've talked about a lot with the retirees and the VA. This is what really gets me about the statistics. And I did a presentation for St. Johns County a while ago, trying to help them push the 24/72. And again, back to the trust of science. Well, we were told that during COVID. Most of us in the medical profession know, the efficacy of masks and, microorganism movement. There's a lot of things that we were like, wait a second, this is not what we were taught. What are you talking about? But with the numbers, I was like, all right, well, let me pull up the numbers of suicides. And it was like, I think it was 74 in the whole of the US. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know of that many in the state of Florida, but these are the official numbers. And I said, which group are we not even counting? Retirees. So, the active duty are what, a 10th, maybe a 20th of how many retirees we have around. But we do not count any of those premature deaths. So the cancers, the heart diseases, all the things, that the addictions, the alcoholism. So those stats, do a huge disservice about the actual magnitude of the problem. But unlike the military, where at least the VA is trying to take care of people after service, the moment that bay door closes behind us, that's it. A year of COBRA and then go fuck yourself, basically. I mean, let's be honest. And you've got a career's worth of physical, mental trauma and no coping mechanisms on the back end.
And you're 3 times more likely to die by suicide than anything on the job, right? And when you think back to your training, how many times did you throw a ladder against a building in training? A couple thousand, probably.
Mm-hmm.
How many times did you do it for real on a fire? Maybe 5 or 10 over the course of your career? Yet we practice and practice and practice that skill. And there is zero being spent on mental health right now, or resiliency, or, hey, we know this is going to happen in your career. You're likely to get married and you're likely to get divorced. We don't track any of those stats. And when people do kill themselves, the family or the department has such shame around it that it's, Stephen died suddenly off duty.
Unexpectedly.
Unexpectedly, right? At home. And so I read those things and I'm immediately like, well, was it a cardiac or was it a suicide?
Or an overdose. That's the other
stigma. Right.
stigma.
Yep. And so we know that suicides are increasing, not decreasing. So despite the fact that we are a little bit more open, that we are talking about it, that we do have EAP programs, that this generation that's coming to the fire service has grown up with therapy, the suicide rate is still increasing. And to me, it is immoral. It is immoral to not give people options that will save their life, even if it means these medicines are on some list with the FDA, which are on that list with the FDA for entirely immoral reasons in the first place. So I can't stand by and watch people suffer when I know this exists. And that's really what it comes down to.
Well, I've highlighted this with many people, including Trevor. The FDA approved OxyContin, which the ripple effects of that kill 100,000 Americans every year. And they approved
And
that.
we're okay with that.
And the guy that approved that then went and worked for Purdue Pharma. But they refused to, acknowledge the MDMA-led psychotherapy that was proposed last year. So when we talk about FDA approval, we have to take that with a huge, bucket of salt in itself.
Absolutely. And there's no money in healing, right? And RFK talked about that in the context of addiction, that there's no money in getting people unaddicted or off the prescription drugs, alcohol. It's all in fee for service. And so until we actually want to get people healthy, this option, because for most people it's one or two journeys and they're at a good place in their life rather than daily medication prescriptions. I think that we're going to be sort of stuck in this rut of increasing suicide and not really understanding why.
Well, I think the other thing, that's glaring is every department around here is talking about mandatory overtime and 56-hour work weeks, if not 80, 120. And that's the other part of the puzzle. We were talking more about mental health, but yet we're losing more people. The cancer, we're deconning, we have Plime events, and we're losing more people to cancer. Well, what's the one fucking thing that you're not talking about that we know is carcinogenic, is directly related to mental ill health, as I've pointed out many times? Sleep deprivation is used for special forces selection, interrogation, and torture. And we're like, surprised when anyone suggests that maybe it's connected to a fucking, suicide epidemic. So when we actually look at that and say, all right, the way we're doing it isn't working. We have an amazing longitudinal study of how not to work a firefighter. So let's do something different. So using the tools that we've discussed today with psychedelics and, psychotherapy at the front door, but also a healthy work week. Would you want the pilot of your plane working 80 hours a week and not sleeping 4 of the days? Of course not. Why are we any different? And so having that conversation, and Florida is leading the way because, now we've got departments that are going to it. They just rescheduled, but I got the Gainesville guys coming on that have stats after a year or so now of all the improvements and the financial changes that they've seen. That is the herd of elephants, as I always say, in the room that we have to address as well. If we know there are direct correlations between sleep deprivation and physical and mental ill health, why the fuck, and this really pisses me off, for example, is the IAFF not talking about this when their leadership is from Boston that works 42 hours a week, 24/72? This is the problem. All the people that are in the positions that could truly make a difference have got their fucking heads in the sand, and then they're shrugging their shoulders while we're all, taking our own lives and dying of overdoses, etc. We have to hit every single pillar of this if we're going to make a difference.
Yeah, and I'm on our union e-board, and I've been socializing the idea of a 24/72 as we look at our next negotiation, and it's a tough one to get traction because 15 years ago, people fought so hard for the 4896, and they think it's the greatest schedule, and they all bought homes that are 4 hours away. And now this means that maybe they have to drive in a little bit more. But really what's going to drive it is, in my opinion, the cities need to see that it saves them money. And I want to believe that the cities in our administration care about firefighters, but they also have another job to do, and that's they care about the bottom line and what it's going to cost. They do care about you at a price, but we also have seen enough to know that if I don't come to work tomorrow, there'll be somebody there in my spot, and that's okay. And I probably won't hear from anybody about it. So I would love to see what financial data can be gleaned by moving towards the 24/72 schedule, because I think that is the answer that will probably make the most change for the physical and mental health of firefighters.
How competitive was it when you wanted to become a firefighter?
So I gave a speech after my academy. I was asked to do that. And at the time, it was more challenging to become a firefighter than to be accepted to Harvard. Harvard had a 3% acceptance rate, and firefighting had about a 1% acceptance rate in terms of number of applications they got to actually getting on the job.
That's what I saw in Anaheim. Basically, we were after probation because they got rid of about a quarter of the class through attrition because the bar was set high and there was no lowering of standards. It was basically 1% of the people that did the written. And this is what I always try and go back to. We are, I mean, that was just over 20 years ago, but up until it seems about 10 years ago, it was still very competitive because the post 9/11, boom obviously was even more interest. But the rising tide lifts all ships. I'll keep hitting this again. When we just create an environment that shows these young people who would be phenomenal firefighters and who are leaning into the trades, we've seen it because they realize that college is also a scam unless you have to go, doctor, lawyer, etc. They want to do a job like this, but they are physically and emotionally intelligent enough to know, okay, well, this is not a healthy working environment. Like you said, Google, is it healthy to be a firefighter? It'll tell you exactly what it is. Google, what's the healthy work week, by the way? It says 24/72 now, which is amazing to see. But we fix the issues that are broken. We forge performance with a healthy work week. The vacancies are, all the vacant spots are filled. Now you've got a profession where people will line up around the building to test for again. And now you're taking that top 1, 10, 15%, wherever you are. So now you're getting the best of the best and people that are bending over backwards to do this job. So it's not, imagine one day, like, where you were and where you are now. So your 4896 isn't fucking working. Your 2448 isn't working. Your Kelly schedule isn't working. But these ones in the Northeast, they've been doing it for a long time. I had one of the chiefs of Washington on. They don't have a recruitment crisis. They have lists that are huge. So this is the thing. It's not the only thing, but you're layering it. But all these other schedules, why do your family not deserve to have you home after 40 hours when the people making the decisions that caused this crisis in the first place go home after 40 hours?
Yeah, and it's we've had our challenges that were just sort of coming out of the last few years, and we solved those staffing problems by doing a lot of lateral hires. And so while that's great, and I love the young people in our department, they bring energy and compassion, but the younger generation is different. They don't want to work all the time. They want to work what the little trifold that they received when they signed up says you're going to work 48 hours a week and then be home for 4 days. They don't want to be there for 3 on, 3 off. And their priorities are in a much healthier place than sort of the older generation in terms of chasing the dollar. And the other thing we see is that we get paid so well these days that it's easier for me to go work an overtime shift and hire somebody to go build the little addition to my house or the shed outside than to go build it myself. And so what we lost when we have this generation that doesn't have the side hustle or the trade is working in a trade is a form of mindfulness when you are building something. And so on their off days, they don't have that thing that they do. They'd rather just go work another day than actually go build the thing that would actually give them some peace. So I love that our younger people are bringing that energy to the profession. I love that they're pushing for fair ways to decide who gets mandatoried. But I think it's going to cause additional problems when you just don't have people who are dying for those overtime shifts. So it's a really interesting time.
Yeah. Well, this is again, I've said this many times on here. I have chiefs telling me, well, if you give them more time off, they'll just work more, which again is an incredibly narcissistic and arrogant thing to say about someone on their days off. But if you have a healthy schedule and you fill all the spots, well, the overtime doesn't go away, but it becomes minimal again. So now you've got a very gentle rotation of people volunteering to do one overtime in a while. And you could do 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, 24 off in that cycle. So you still don't do a 48, even with an overtime. But exactly like you said, there's nothing wrong with working on your days off. Everyone has something they also love to do. You could be a personal trainer, you could be landscaper, you could be, installing cabinets, a real estate agent, whatever it is. That's a separate identity, separate trade, separate income. God forbid there's some issue with your fire service job. So there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're not doing an overnight job, ER,
Mm-hmm.
second fire department. That,
Yep.
there's nothing. I am not opposed to having that in writing. You cannot work overnight. That's the only stipulation. So now, you're getting away, you're decompressing, you're learning another skill, you're being an innovator, an entrepreneur. Those are all fantastic things. And so we get away from that reliance on overtime in the first place, because if it's not there to work, then it just becomes a non-issue then. And,
Yep.
you go to a grocery store or a bank and they told you outside of the city, you gave us that example, but a regular bank, oh, we're understaffed, so we need you to work Saturday and Sunday as well. How many bank clerks would you have? Like none.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why is it any different in our profession?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that is the challenge for administrators now to figure this one out. And going back to the financial part, I think that what will drive it is when they realize that a 24/72 schedule is financially smarter for everybody. And it truly is a win-win-win. It's not firefighters being lazy, that they will come out ahead as well.
Yeah, 100%. They will. And then, you've got extra money then for gyms and mental health programs and,
Yep.
all the other things. I just had one of the doctors from Pronuvo. They do a full body MRI.
Yep. We do that. Yep.
Oh, you do? Yeah.
Yep.
I was amazed. I had one done myself and I was like, why are we, obviously technology has evolved, but this should be a must have for every department, because if you get that done every, year, 2 years, whatever it ends up being, you have a baseline and you have trending now. So you can see if something becomes worrying, whether it's your visceral fat, whether it's a mass somewhere, a thinning of an artery. What an incredibly powerful tool. And you could free up funds for that by, creating this healthy work week that's not wasting all this money downstream.
Yeah, there's no doubt that a test like Pronovo and also testosterone testing from day one entering the academy is incredibly important, so that you can tie that inevitable loss of testosterone to the actual job, rather than saying, well, I guess you're just one of the unlucky few whose testosterone is now gone. Which brings us to the whole other thing. Like we are great with the medicine at healing your mental space, but there's some healing to the vessel that also needs to be done. And so when we talk about you need to go see a naturopath, get your testosterone checked, get your cortisol checked, that's all part of healing the whole body. Because we can do everything in the world with your mind, but if your body doesn't support it because you're constantly low T or whatever else, it's hard to keep those gains.
Yeah, which again, I think one of the other conversations, your employer creates a healthy work week for you, and in return, you put in a fitness standard, a punitive fitness standard. And again, having an on ramp, if you just put it in, you're not firing everyone tomorrow, but whatever it is, a year and a half, 2 years to get to where you need to be. We'll take you offline if need be, but that is only it's a win-win as well. You forge performance on the fireground, you forge longevity for the individual, and, from your employer's point of view, you're just going to get fat and, sick less, and hurt less.
Yep.
So that's a win-win-win. And again, don't get me wrong, at the moment with the way everyone's worked, it's hard to put in that standard. But the fact that historically unions have actually opposed fitness standards in a profession where we need to be incredibly strong and incredibly fit, I mean, honestly, it nauseates me. So that's another mistake that we got to undo. Not to lose jobs, because anyone who actually wants to do the job will get back to where they need to be, and their family will thank them for it. But it will also filter out the people that are there that have no interest whatsoever of actually being in shape for the job, who shouldn't be on the rig in the first place. It sounds harsh, but as we said, this job isn't for everyone. And by lowering the bar, we've increased the chances of that kind of thing happening.
And the public deserves it, right? The public deserves having somebody who is fit enough to do the job in order to save them on that one in 1,000 times that it requires a superb level of fitness. You have to be ready to do that.
100%. All right. Well, the S.I.R.E.N Project, then we talked about the medicine. Talk to me about what you guys do for the American first responders.
Sure. So, we've sort of built a program, and like I mentioned before, everybody focuses on the actual retreat, which is a small part of it. So what we do is we start with getting you onboarded and getting you some coaching. So everybody who's going to be part of our program goes through a screening, including what kind of medicines are you on, what can you stay on, what can you not stay on. Um, we have fantastic coaches who go through building some intentions around why you're doing this journey. They won't ever solve the problem for you, but they will help guide you in a way where you solve it yourself. One thing nobody talks about with this medicine is the medicine does not cure you. You are curing yourself with the help of the medicine. And so all of this is within you. So we start a couple months out. We have a couple one-on-one coaching sessions. We do a couple of group calls so people can get to know each other. We send out a pretty thick workbook so people can start asking themselves the questions they should. Try to build some healthy habits like journaling, like going for walks, like some diet changes that are really tough to do. And so I applaud the people that do them, but we make sure they're off nicotine. We make sure they're off caffeine. We drastically reduce red meat coming up to the retreat, and no alcohol. So they're off all their alcohol. They're off all their opioids. It's really an elimination diet, and it sets them up because what we found is that through the medicine, if they have several weeks of really being clean, it's a lot easier to never go back to those habits, whether that's chewing or drinking caffeine in the morning or limiting your caffeine. I know for me, I drank a pot of coffee a day, every day. And when I came back from the medicine, I just had no desire to do it. It wasn't ever an intention of mine, but my body just no longer wanted that in me. And the same went for drinking. So my drinking is drastically less now, where I may have a glass of wine a month with my wife, but that's about it. So we set them up with a dieta. Um, you know, Historically, that would include not having sex. We don't go that far in asking people not to have sex or anything before, because that's just asking people to fail. And then they go down to the retreat, and the retreat's held in Puerto Vallarta. Dr. Andrea Lucy, I mentioned, facilitates the whole thing. I often go to hold space, or other people like me go and hold space, and they're there for about 6 days. And that includes sweat lodges, the rapé, the flower bath, um, the medicine itself, and then a ton of integration training. How are we going to implement all this stuff when we get back home? And then when they return home, we do the same thing. We have a couple individual coaching sessions and a couple group calls, and they're placed in the larger community. So we use Signal to communicate. They're placed in the alumni group with the other 150 or so alumni that are in that group, and it's almost like an accountability group. And then their own individual tribe. Signal group stays alive so that they can keep in touch with each other. We do things that we think are important, including drug testing leading up to it, so that we know that people have done the diet and so that it's safe for them to have the medicine. So it's really kind of a well-rounded thing. After they've done the medicine, we will let them know about other things. There's some people who want to do more. So if we're going to host an ayahuasca retreat, we let them know about that. There's places we go for Wachuma, which is San Pedro. And so it's a place for people who now can all trust each other and are part of this community to go and talk. And so even within my own department, I've sent almost 20% now of the department. So for me, it was a question of what happens to the morale around here if people have experienced the medicine. And so we have our own groups within our department who we know have experienced the same thing, have had their sort of hearts opened, and you can see the change among them. So it's our own little support group.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. What have you seen as far as a shift then from, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine today about his uncle, who's, very deeply religious as far as Christianity, and won't do the ibogaine in this particular case because of his faith, and it's against what God would have said, and you take a step back and you go, wait a second, you're addicted to this one um, synthetic chemical, and you're opposed to this thing that grows naturally on the earth. God put it here. So what have you seen as far as a shift of the stigma of this kind of treatment?
We have benefited greatly from the veteran community, particularly organizations like Heroic Hearts and Vets, to reduce the stigma. And that was important for me personally when I knew that a guy that I had the utmost respect for, Jimmy, when he told me he had done it, and a SEAL Team 6 guy doing it made it okay for me. So what we see here at home around the kitchen table is not so much, I don't advertise what I do around my department at all. But I do remove the stigma of talking about stuff that bothers us. So if people want to talk about that in public around the kitchen table, but what we mostly see is somebody pulls me aside on the app floor and says, "Hey, man, this is going on," and I become a safe place for people to go and talk to, and that makes a difference because from there, let's go get you some EAP. Let's start the process. And that's the scariest thing for most people is putting their hand up and saying, I can't fix this myself. I need help. I've reached the end where I know I can't fix this anymore. And I certainly experienced that. There's no way in hell I was ever going to raise my hand and say, I need help, until somebody showed me that was all right. So that's one of the big changes that we've seen.
Beautiful. And one last thing, talk to me about the financial side of the S.I.R.E.N Project.
So I'm a firefighter, and going and asking people for money is awful, and we're not really good at it, but that's what drives a lot of this process. So we have funded a lot of it by working overtime. So I will work overtime, put it into the nonprofit so that people can go get the healing. As we've become known a little bit, there's more demand, and it is morally repulsive to me to have somebody apply, get put on our wait list, and go, yeah, I know you're hurting really bad. I know you've told us you've had thoughts of suicide. We can get you in the summer of 2027. Like that is too long to wait. So we need funding. And so we were out actively looking for funding. We haven't announced it publicly yet, but we will be having a large gala in New York City on September 10th with an incredible speaker this will be kind of our first major public exposure. When we announce it, you will have heard of her and the things she's done, but it will be a fantastic experience in New York. And then we're going to be there on September 11th for the 21st anniversary. So we haven't announced ticket sales yet, but please check out the S.I.R.E.N Project.org. That's where it will all be announced. That's where we'll have ticket sales, and follow us on all the socials. Our goal is we would love to reach first responders and have them sign up, but we also need your rich uncle to contribute something to help, because that's really what it comes down to.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're going to do another interview further into the year so that we can make sure people know when everything is live as well. So for people listening then, where firstly can they find the S.I.R.E.N Project?
So we're online at the S.I.R.E.N Project.org. The S.I.R.E.N Project.org or the S.I.R.E.N Project is on all the socials. So we are revamping our website. You'll see a brand new, fresh one out there. So the website is great, but what really I think gets people to commit is when somebody they know or trust has gone. And so as we have built out, as we've had more people attend, you've hosted a couple or three here on your show, and talking to people you trust is really what gives people the comfort to go. There are a bunch of organizations out there. I think this is the only one where Angela and I are both actual firefighters. We're not therapists. We speak the language. We have lived in the firehouse. We know what's going on. So that authenticity, I think, is important when you're looking at who you trust to provide this. So we're on the sirenproject.org, the socials, and I welcome anybody to call me. I'll give you my phone number. It's 415-722-1798. If you are struggling, if you need help, you can reach out to me. And I'm at tim@thesirenproject.org. And email is always a faster way to get a hold of me. So tim@thesirenproject.org.
Beautiful. Well, I want to throw some quick closing questions at you before I let you go. The
All right.
first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
I referenced one called Operator Syndrome. That's by Dr. Chris Frew.
Frey, I think.
Frey. Yeah. He is, that really opened my eyes because I turned the page and saw myself on every one of them. So that's a fantastic one for starters. He's also started doing work on firefighter syndrome and police officer stuff. And so he's in the space. There's another book called The Medicine is Sacred by Uncle Henry, who was one of the mentors for Dr. Lucy. So if you want to really go read about some of the history of the Lakota and the Lakota medicine, that is a fantastic place to start.
What about film, television, or documentaries?
This is interesting because we talk about the dieta for people going on these retreats, and part of your diet is what you consume in terms of media, social media, movies. And so I've gone away from being like a John Wick fan, which I love the series, but I don't watch that. There's a great documentary called Finding Joe, which I love. There's the mole, the horse, the short film.
Mm-hmm.
Love that. And we're out there often recommending, like, try watching this your first couple of weeks back, not this. So those are a couple of favorites of mine. I think the movie Soul, to watch that before and after you have experienced the medicine, is fantastic, because I think that gets to a lot of what we're trying to teach people.
Brilliant. Yeah, this is totally recreationally now. I'm removing this from what we've talked about. But when I lived in Japan, mushrooms were actually legal. They had Hawaiian and Mexican. And I went and watched Planet of the Apes with a friend. And that was an amazing experience. When the lights came up, everyone was an ape. And, very, very humorous.
Right.
But then I watched it, I think a few weeks later, I watched a Jet Li movie. Definitely don't recommend that. That you said, that intensity on that particular mushroom, those two did not go together. I just couldn't catch up. I was like behind each of the punches and kicks the whole way, and it just not so much of a fun experience. So I can see how, once you've had that spiritually enlightening experience, that you'd want something that would really touch your soul, rather than you killed my dog, I'm going to murder 5,000 people.
Exactly.
All right. Well, the next question, is there a person you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
I got three that come to mind immediately. One is Dr. Lucy, who we've mentioned here. She'd be a tough one to get because she's a little shy, and she is has no ego, which is so refreshing. But she is a fantastic person with a ton of experience with military and first responders. Next would be Jeff Boss. Jeff Boss is a retired Navy SEAL. He operated at the highest levels, and he has changed his life to be from sort of that tier 1 operator to now he's going to be a therapist. And fantastic guy. I work with him quite a bit, and I absolutely love him. And he would be fantastic to be on your show. The third person is a local guy. He retired a couple years ago. His name's JD Madden. JD Madden was a deputy chief for the city of Santa Clara, and he is very special in my heart. He is somebody who, when he speaks, you just listen and follow, and he has that presence about him. And he helped guide that department through a suicide that they had of somebody that I know, who was on my task force and who JD was very close with. So JD Madden has some very special views on the world and is a fantastic guy.
Beautiful. Well, I'd love to get any of them if you're able to help connect. That would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. All right. Well, then the last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you. What do you do to decompress?
So my practices have really changed. Obviously there were some unhealthy practices I had before. Now my go-to is when I wake up, because I wake up early ahead of my wife and son. I go and I like to meditate, and I'll do that for 15 minutes, and that sort of sets my day up. But I have a progression. So if this medicine does not relieve you of the pressures of the world, right? I'm still human. All the stuff that gets me mad still gets me mad, but it's a progression of I meditate, then I go for a 30-minute walk out in the woods. And then if that's still not working, I'll go hit the gym for a hard workout. And if that's still not working, then I get the pen out and I journal. So I have sort of a progression that I need to go down. And like our mental patients, I'm no different. When I'm feeling good, I stop doing all the practices that I know I need to do every day. And then 2 weeks later, I'll be grumpy and cranky and I don't know why. And I'll go, oh, I haven't meditated for 2 weeks because I've been feeling so good. So part of it is forgiveness of yourself for when you're not perfect, or you don't get up in that morning and hit the gym really hard, that your body needs rest and you listen to it. Like there is some level of understanding of forgiveness of like, we're all going to be human and nobody's going to be perfect.
Absolutely. I'm the same with that, even with my back health routine that healed my back. If I don't do that for a while, it gets a bit tweaky again. That's the worst thing, is when you feel good, you just drop off and you kind of forget that that's the reason that you feel good in the first place.
And the number one thing for me on that is when I eat sugar. Like I will go on this kick where I'm eating really, really dirty, and I'll be like, God, my back is starting to flare up again. I don't know why. I'm like, oh, you idiot. You've been eating sugar for the last week. Like it totally has an impact physically on me. So that's another one.
100%. All right. Well, you talked about the S.I.R.E.N Project already. Where else can people find you as far as social media and then the dog training that you do?
Sure. I'm Tim Houweling on all the social media, and I run another nonprofit that we didn't really talk about. It's called HD Search Dog Fund. HD Search Dog Fund is meant to support the working dogs in the United States, specifically the search and rescue dogs. What that means is every year we host the largest search and rescue dog training in the United States. A couple of weeks ago, we had 105 search and rescue dog teams from across the United States and Canada come to the Bay Area, and we had them cycle through 3 training sites: Task Force 3, Task Force 4, and Task Force 7 of California. And our 3 task forces have worked great together. We're all very close. We all train together. And the idea of that organization is that the USAR folks owe it to the wilderness folks to prepare them for when the call comes, when we do have the big earthquake and they're going to be on the pile. And so we want to do a lot of information sharing so that they can operate safely. And we want to learn from them too about how they do their jobs. So we're trying to bridge the gap. So that's hdsearchdogfund.org. On the socials is HD Search Dog Fund. And that's really where I get a lot of my decompression time, and my own personal time is the dog stuff.
Beautiful. Well, Tim, I want to say thank you so much. It's been such an amazing conversation. Just the search dog conversation alone was fascinating, but obviously all the mental health side and the psychedelic therapy, I think, was just so important for people to hear. And it just layers. I've had SEAL Team 6 people, and SAS and Australian firefighters, and USAR search handlers. They're hearing the same message over and over again. So hopefully, it's really adding weight to the importance of this. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you for the platform. I appreciate it, and love your show, and you're making a big difference to everybody. So thank you.